I was standing in the conference room, my palms resting flat against the polished walnut table, staring at the faces of the very family members who had assured me, over and over, that the foundation my late husband and I built together had run dry. They said donations dwindled. Expenses soared. They claimed they'd done everything they could to keep the dream alive. But that morning, the independent auditor, my lawyer's recommendation, set a single binder in front of me. A thick one. Heavy. Metal rings clapped shut after he opened it. And then he said the words that changed everything. Mrs. Holden, the foundation's primary endowment, $680,000, remains untouched. Not a cent spent. I remember the sound of breath leaving the room. Not mine, theirs. My sister-in-law's jaw twitched. My nephew's pen stopped clicking. Even the family accountant, a man who'd always prided himself on composure, went visibly pale. They had spent months insisting the money was gone. They had pressured me to dissolve the foundation quietly. They had even implied that my husband, Victor, had mismanaged it before he passed. But the numbers were right there. Documented. Audited. Verified. Every donation intact. Every dollar accounted for. And every explanation they had fed me, every carefully rehearsed sigh and sympathetic tone, suddenly curdled into a new shape, lies. In that instant, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply folded my hands, stared at each of them in turn, and asked a single question. Who, I said, thought it wise to treat me as if I wouldn't check the books myself? No one answered. But their silence, thick, suffocating, guilty, told me everything. I was 65. Widowed. Slower than I used to be. But I was not gullible. And they were about to learn just how dangerous a calm woman with the truth at her back could be. I closed the binder gently, the way you close a door to a room you will never again enter with innocence. Because from that moment on, I was no longer asking for clarity. I was preparing for justice. And this was only the beginning. As the auditor excused himself, leaving us in the dimly lit silence, my nephew leaned forward and whispered, too confident for a man just exposed. You don't understand what you're starting, Aunt Margaret. He had no idea how wrong he was. My name is Margaret Holden, and at 65 years old, I've learned the world does not reward the loud, the brash, or the cruel. It rewards the steadfast, the observant, the ones who listen long enough to hear what others hope you miss. I live in the old brick house on Winterby Lane, the one with the sprawling maple tree and the porch swing Victor hung for me on our 10th anniversary. When he passed 3 years ago, cancer, quiet and merciless, I felt an ache settle behind my ribs that never fully healed. But I kept moving. Because Victor wanted the foundation to thrive even without him. We started it together. Holden Hands. A small non-profit that provided emergency assistance to older adults living alone. Groceries. Utility relief. Home repairs. Things that slip through the cracks for people who no longer have anyone to call. After Victor's death, I stepped back from operations, trusting family members who offered, quite insistently, to handle the heavy lifting. I thought they were helping out of love. I thought they respected his legacy. I thought they respected me. But months before the audit, I began noticing small inconsistencies. Emails phrased oddly. Reports arriving late. A missing receipt here, an incomplete ledger there. Nothing large enough to sound an alarm. Just unsettling. Like a house that feels slightly tilted even when a level insists otherwise. Still, when they told me the foundation's funds had dwindled to almost nothing, I believed them. Why wouldn't I? They were my late husband's relatives. People who knew how much that organization meant to both of us. But then came the night I couldn't sleep. Not from grief. Grief is familiar now, almost companionable, but from suspicion. I pulled up my late husband's old correspondence with the bank, looked at numbers I hadn't examined in over a year, and one detail gnawed at me. The endowment was structured so that accessing it required my signature. Mine alone. So how had it vanished without me? That question was the first match. The audit became the flame. And now, as I sat in my quiet kitchen days after the confrontation, sipping tea that had long gone cold, I realized something startling. I wasn't frightened. Not of the truth. Not of what came next. Because for the first time since Victor died, I felt fully awake again. The next morning, I received an envelope slid beneath my door. No return address. Inside, one line handwritten in rushed, slanted ink. Stop digging. My relationship with Victor's family has always been polite. Not warm. Not cold. Simply arranged out of obligation, like furniture you learn to navigate around without much thought. His sister, Denise, was the one who always hovered at the edge of conversations, listening, assessing, waiting for the moment to insert herself. His brother had passed away years before, leaving Denise to raise her two sons alone. Those boys, Evan and Mark, were grown men now, both in their 30s. Evan, the elder, had a calm exterior masking a calculating mind. He dressed like someone forever attending a job interview. Pressed shirts, perfect hair, no warmth behind the eyes. Mark, on the other hand, lived life with the impatience of someone who believed the world owed him convenience. Still, when Victor fell ill, it was Denise who brought casseroles and helped arrange appointments. It was the nephews who cut the lawn when my hands shook too much to steady the mower. I didn't forget these kindnesses. They mattered. And they underestimated what truth can do when you finally stop running from it. My parents, Harold and Marlene, raised me with a rigid philosophy. Family loyalty above personal comfort, silence above conflict, and obedience above curiosity. It wasn't a spoken rule. It was simply the atmosphere we breathed. My father, tall and commanding, had the type of presence that filled a room before he entered it. He praised strength, discipline, and image. He believed emotions were private weaknesses, and he treated vulnerability like it was contagious. My mother, graceful and immaculate, played the role of the supportive wife so perfectly it became impossible to separate her identity from the performance. She was affectionate in a distant way, always touching my cheek, always smiling, always reassuring me that everything was fine, even when nothing was. Growing up, I learned to be the mediator, the good daughter, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who cleaned up messes quietly so that my parents could keep their reputation pristine. When I joined the family business in my 20s, it wasn't a choice, it was the expectation. My father placed me where he needed competence, and my mother encouraged me to contribute to the family's long-term success. I contributed everything. My time, my skills, my health. They contributed secrets. The business became the center of our family dynamic. Conversations revolved around what needed fixing, what needed hiding, what needed presenting. But never around what needed understanding. My father trusted me with operations but never with decisions. My mother trusted me with emotional labor but never with truth. The collapse of the business, at least as they described it, felt like a final blow. One more burden placed on me without warning. One more emotional performance I was expected to applaud. But what struck me now, looking back through the lens of betrayal, was the way they'd spoken about it. The way they'd insisted on finality. There's nothing left, Elaine. Not a cent. We've all lost together. Together. They loved that word. They wielded it like a shield and a leash. But what kind of together ends with only one person bearing the consequences? In the years after the collapse, I'd visited them weekly. I drove up to their hilltop home, admired their manicured garden, listened as they described how they were adjusting to retired life. They never appeared financially strained, but I didn't question it. My mother always had an explanation: small inheritances, careful budgeting, leftover savings we forgot to mention. I had wanted to believe her, because questioning her would have meant questioning everything. Now that I knew the truth, or at least the beginning of it, our entire family history felt skewed. The foundation had always been tilted, I just hadn't seen the angle until now. Something else unsettled me. The transfers on the statement started around the same time they'd insisted the business was in trouble. And some of the amounts looked eerily similar to the debts they'd claimed we were forced to pay. They hadn't lost the money. They had moved it away from me, away from transparency, into a private world where they trusted only each other. I felt something heavy inside me, not anger, not yet, but a kind of quiet, expanding understanding. A realization that the distance between us had never been accidental. It had been built, brick by brick, choice by choice, lie by lie. And now that a crack had finally appeared in that wall of silence, I intended to widen it. It took me an hour to calm my hands enough to study the statement again. Once I did, the details became clearer, more damning. The Rush Family Trust, originally created by my grandparents, had been siphoned into offshore accounts for over 15 years. The total amount was staggering. And then I saw it, a notation at the bottom of the page. Primary beneficial owners, Harold Rush and Marlene Rush. Secondary beneficiaries, none. None. The trust, which by all legal and moral rights should have listed me as a future beneficiary, had been altered. My name wasn't just missing, it had been erased. 10 years ago, when the business supposedly collapsed, I had asked to see the trust documents. My father had said they'd gone missing in the chaos of shutting everything down. My mother had given me that sympathetic look she mastered so well and said, "Let's not dwell on paperwork. We need to stick together, dear." But here in my hands was proof they had not only kept the trust intact, they had expanded it, hidden it, protected it from me. My chest tightened as I remembered the sacrifices I had made. Selling my townhome at a loss, taking community work just to stay afloat, living frugally while they remodeled their kitchen. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal, deliberate, cruel in its convenience. They had watched me struggle. They had watched me adapt to less. They had watched me shrink my life, piece by piece. And they said nothing. Because saying something would have meant acknowledging that they had chosen themselves over me. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. As I sat with that truth, the betrayal deepened. If the trust had been restructured, they must have consulted lawyers. They must have signed documents. They must have made a conscious decision to remove me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was theft. Not of money alone, but of security, family legacy, and decades of my labor. My stomach tightened, but my voice stayed calm. "Why are you coming forward now?" Cal exhaled shakily. "Because they're planning something bigger. And they don't care who they hurt. I'd rather lose a job than lose my conscience." I thanked him and slid the folder into my bag. That evening, I called Linda Carr, my attorney, a woman with steel in her spine and an almost frightening ability to spot inconsistencies. She listened without interrupting as I laid out everything. The false reports, the dissolution plan, the threatening note, the accountant's folder. She asked only one question. "Margaret, do you want to pursue this quietly or correctly?" "Correctly," I said. No hesitation. The next few weeks descended into a different kind of grief, a procedural one. Pulling documents from storage. Rereading Victor's old messages. Tracing board meeting minutes. Each piece revealing a puzzle they thought I would never assemble. Linda and her team conducted a full audit, independent and impenetrable. And then came the meeting that opened this story, the moment she placed the binder on the conference room table and gave my family no room to wriggle. After the meeting, the real unraveling began. Emails were subpoenaed. Transactions examined. Statements compared. Every truth they thought buried rose to the surface with quiet, unstoppable clarity. And during this process, Linda uncovered something even more damning. The dissolution request had already been drafted for submission. All they needed was my signature. They almost succeeded. Almost. One night, while sorting papers in my study, I heard footsteps outside my home. Then a soft knock. And a voice I recognized all too well. "Aunt Margaret, we need to talk." I opened the door but left the screen latched. Evan stood on my porch, hands shoved in his pockets, posture stiff. Gone was the polished confidence he usually wore like jewelry. He looked unsettled, tired, trapped. "Aunt Margaret," he said quietly, "you're making a mistake." I raised an eyebrow. "You'll need to be more specific." He exhaled sharply, glancing toward the street. "If you push this, if you keep dragging the audit forward, none of us walk away clean. It'll ruin Denise. And Mark. And me. You don't want that." His tone was soft, coaxing. The same tone he used when convincing me the foundation had collapsed. "You lied to me," I said. "You all did." He swallowed. "We didn't lie. We misrepresented things." The word was so absurd I almost laughed. He stepped closer. "Look, you're grieving. We all are. You're not thinking clearly. You're letting outsiders manipulate you." Outsiders. He meant Linda. He meant the auditor. He meant anyone who wasn't under their control. I felt something harden inside me then. Not anger, but certainty. "You came here hoping I'd feel guilty," I said. "But guilt requires innocence. And you forfeited that when you conspired to dismantle your uncle's legacy." For a flicker of a second, his composure cracked. Then he muttered, "We just wanted what was fair." Fair. As if fairness meant inheriting money meant for the vulnerable. As if fairness meant lying to a widow because she was easier to deceive than the law. I unlatched the screen door, not to invite him in, but to make my stance unmistakable. "I've made my decision, Evan. The truth will come out. All of it." His jaw clenched. "Then don't blame me for what happens next." He walked away without another word. I locked the door. Then I sat at my kitchen table and let the quiet settle around me like armor. My decision was no longer emotional. No longer about vengeance. It was about responsibility. If I let this go, I would be complicit. If I backed down, they would do it again. To someone else, to some other vulnerable family member, to another legacy they felt entitled to rewrite. And so I chose the only path that honored Victor. I gave Linda full authority to proceed. Depositions. Financial tracing. Formal complaints. Board removal procedures. The wheels of justice, slow but relentless, began turning. A week later, Denise herself stormed into my home uninvited and said 4 icy words. "You'll regret this, Margaret." Confrontation did not arrive as shouting or violence. It arrived as paperwork. As silence. As the slow erosion of confidence on their faces as the legal process unfolded inch by methodical inch. Linda filed for an emergency injunction preventing any dissolution or transfer of funds. The judge granted it immediately. Next came the forensic accountant's full report, 62 pages long, detailing every discrepancy, falsified report, and attempt to manipulate the foundation's operations. It was the kind of document no one can argue with. No emotion. No speculation. Just dates, numbers, signatures, and lies. Denise tried to claim incompetence rather than intent. The emails proved otherwise. Mark insisted he barely participated. His name appeared on every draft, every vote, every compensation proposal. And Evan, once so smooth, so composed, became visibly smaller with every meeting. He stopped returning calls. Stopped showing up to his job. Stopped pretending. The silent downfall wasn't dramatic. It was gradual. Inevitable. The state opened an inquiry into non-profit fraud. The board, now legally suspended, was removed entirely. Financial penalties loomed. And the community, once proud of the Holden name, began murmuring with disappointment, not toward me but toward them. Their reputations cracked first. Their confidence next. And finally, their unity collapsed when each began blaming the others. But the most poetic moment came quietly, during a mediation session. Denise stared across the table at me, eyes glassy with exhaustion. "You could have handled this privately," she whispered. "We're family." I replied evenly, Family doesn't hide $680,000 and expect silence. She looked away. Not ashamed, just defeated. Evan refused to speak during the session. His hands trembled each time he signed a document acknowledging wrongdoing. Mark asked, half angry, half pleading, if I intended to ruin them completely. No, I said. Your own actions handled that. Their downfall wasn't loud. No one was hauled away in handcuffs. No headlines screamed their names. It was quieter, more personal. Board removal. Financial restitution. Career damage that would follow them for years. And the cold realization that they had gambled on my perceived weakness, and lost to my resolve. But after the final mediation, as I walked to my car, I noticed a single envelope tucked under my wiper blade. Inside, a handwritten note from Mark. You may have won legally. But this isn't over. I drove home slowly that night, the threat in Mark's note lingering in my mind like a storm cloud refusing to dissipate. But for the first time in months, when I stepped through my front door, the air in my home felt still, peaceful, even. The kind of peace that grows only after the truth has been aired like laundry left outside to dry. I made myself tea, sat in Victor's old armchair, and let myself breathe. Truly breathe. The foundation was safe. Its funds secure. Its mission intact. And yet the emotional toll pressed gently against me, reminding me of all that had been lost. Not financially, but relationally. I had not just uncovered a conspiracy. I had uncovered a lack of character in people I had once welcomed into my home, people who had stood beside me at my husband's funeral, people I had trusted out of habit rather than earned respect. Loss takes many shapes. Some come with funerals. Others come with revelations. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the community shifted. Word spread, not through gossip, but through transparency. I held a meeting at the community center, explaining what had happened in calm, clear terms. No dramatics. No vengeance. Just truth. People thanked me. They donated again. They volunteered. Slowly, Holden Hands revived with new energy, new leaders, and new safeguards. One morning, while reviewing applications for 2 new board members, I came across a letter from a woman named Althea, age 72, who wrote, I'm too old to chase lies, but I'm not too old to protect what matters. Her words resonated deeply. I felt something warm expand in my chest, a quiet sense of purpose returning. As for the threats, Linda handled those swiftly. A formal notice was sent to Mark that any further harassment would lead to escalation. There were no more notes after that. Even Denise, eventually, sent a message, not an apology, but an acknowledgement. I didn't realize how much this meant to you. I didn't respond. Some doors are better left closed. Peace doesn't always arrive wrapped in forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives in the form of distance, boundaries, and a life reclaimed. And when spring arrived, I visited Victor's grave with fresh flowers. I stood there quietly and whispered, It's safe now. I kept it safe. For the first time, the weight on my shoulders lifted rather than lingered. Just as I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. A message from Cal, the accountant who had helped me. You should know, they tried to access the foundation files again last night. The attempted access was unsuccessful, the new security measures held firm, but the incident served as a final chapter rather than a new threat. People don't change simply because they've been caught. But I had changed. And that made all the difference. In the months that followed, the foundation not only stabilized, it grew. With new oversight, new volunteers, and renewed community trust, Holden Hands reached more seniors in need than ever before. Every success felt like a small conversation with Victor, a quiet affirmation that I had protected what we built. What did I learn? That betrayal is rarely loud at first. It often begins as convenience. A small lie told to avoid discomfort. A shortcut justified because no one will notice. But betrayal grows in the shadows created by trust wrongly placed. And justice, true justice, is not the satisfaction of watching someone fall. It's the steady, unwavering commitment to stand for what is right, even when the people standing against you share your family name. When you are older, people make assumptions. That you are tired. That you are pliable. That your grief can be used as a curtain through which they may quietly slip their hands. But age is not weakness. Loss is not confusion. And silence is not ignorance. My revenge was not dramatic. It was not violent. It was documentation, truth, persistence, and the refusal to let deceit dismantle a legacy built with love. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Never allow someone else's entitlement to rewrite your history. Never assume silence equals compliance. And never underestimate your own strength simply because others do. Justice is patient, ethical, methodical, and when wielded with integrity, it is far more powerful than any threat, any lie, or any false sense of family loyalty. In the end, the foundation endured. I endured. Truth endured. And the people who underestimated me learned a quiet, unshakable lesson. A calm woman holding the truth is the most formidable force in any room.